Welcome back to The Long Way Home. I'm your host, Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today I want to talk about a subject that is a little more sensitive, I think, and a subject that I've touched on in the past in other forms and other various ways, and that is having to do with loss and how loss affects us, especially with the deaths of those closest to us. Because I've been through my share of loss throughout my life. Some of it in regards to death, and some of it in the regards to losing losing contact, losing touch with family, and that kind of stuff. So I wanted to kind of dive into that, especially because this episode is going to be coming out sometime around late June, probably on YouTube. Late June, early July. And July 4th is actually the anniversary of the day my mom passed away. She passed away on July 4th, 2005. And that was the first real experience for me that really hit hard and close to home in dealing with any kind of loss. Now, it wasn't the first person that I knew that had died. Before that, I'd had some family that we had known. Basically considered them family. They were real close family friends, but people that I knew that had died. My great grandmother, I'd been to her funeral. So I'd been to funerals and dealt with different kinds of loss. But that was the first time that it hit somebody that was like a day to day person. And there's a big difference between losing somebody who you talk to on the phone every once in a while, losing somebody who you care about and love, but not but somebody you don't live with, and losing somebody that is in your house every day. And it can be an incredibly, I don't want to come across, and I don't want people to think that I'm being like harsh or because realistically, everybody deals with loss in their own way. Everybody deals with loss in a different way, and I can't tell you what how you should react or how you should feel about losing somebody based off of where they live in relation to you. If somebody, maybe you're very close to a grandparent or even your parents, you've moved out of the house, you're an adult, you're out in the world doing your own thing, and you're still close to your parents. And losing them can still be a huge deal, and it can still be something that can bring you down to a very a low place. For me, after losing my mom, I was nearly, I wanted to end my life at one point, and it was a very hard situation for me to go through. And I can't tell you that you're wrong or that there's something, you know, because everybody's going to deal with that different. Everybody's going to go through those things differently. What I can do is give my experience, what I've gone through, and if you've gone through something similar, maybe it'll help you. I, this kind of a this kind of an episode is one that's going to be more personal. Is going to be more deep. So I want to just kind of get into it and talk about that because, so for me, I'll go through it and talk a little bit about the weekend that my mom passed away. Actually, is where I want to start because that for me will never leave my mind. I will always remember that weekend like it was yesterday. It was July 4th, 2005 was a Monday. But that prior weekend, the Friday night, we had gone and we had seen the fireworks. We went to Red, White, and Boom. That was in downtown Columbus. And I remember her telling my sister at the time, my sister had chicken pox, so she couldn't get out of the car. She was restless. She was frustrated with the fact that she couldn't get out of the car. And my mom told her, "This could be my last year to see the fireworks. Stop acting up. I want to enjoy it." And none of us really understood at the time the meaning of those words or how big those words were until a couple days later. And over that weekend, I was working. I was working at a gas station at the time, and I had actually worked the majority of the day on that Saturday. I had to work overnight Saturday night. Um, and I was trying to watch the NASCAR race, and there's a bunch of other stuff going on. And then I got home on Sunday morning and got a little bit of sleep before my mom had a 4th of July party. So we had family over, and I had to get up for that. And it was kind of a wild weekend. And then that evening, I actually got a call from work asking me if I could come in and help out with the rush. They had big thing going on. We had the fireworks there in the town we were in, and they needed some extra help. So I came in for that and wound up working the entire night. And normally this wouldn't be a big deal. And I'd had fun. I'd enjoyed myself actually that night. We had a good time. I enjoyed my coworkers. And so I'd had a good time. And then that next morning, July 4th, was I was supposed to work first shift. So I was working a double basically. And I got a call. Well, the my work call got a call. The gas station phone rang. I was in the back room and I came out and they told me, and I had this weird feeling, and they told me, well, the call is for you. And I was like, oh no, this isn't going to be good. And I picked it up and it was my brother on the line. He was telling me that, hey, there's something wrong with mom. Dad can't get her up. The ambulance is on the way. You need to get home now. And I didn't even say anything to the manager. I dropped the phone. I grabbed my jacket that I had brought, and I booked it out the door. Got in the car, and I barreled home. The only thing I remember from the drive home was I passed the ambulance, and I saw my dad in it. He was, just look on his face, I could tell something was very wrong. And I got home, and I sat down and waited for the call to come from the hospital. And within a few minutes, dad called and I picked up the phone and he said, hey, it's your mom. You need to get your brothers and your sister in the car and get here now. By the time we got there, she was already gone. And for me, it was this huge hole all of a sudden that appeared because I didn't expect it. Sometimes, and she had been sick. Don't get me wrong. She was on dialysis for a few years there. She'd been sick for a long time, but it was still unexpected. It wasn't, she had thrown a party the day before. She seemed to be feeling fine from all outward appearances, from what we could tell. And so having that loss at that time, it crushed me. I spent years recovering from that loss because I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't go to counseling. I didn't talk to anybody about it because the way that I was raised and the way that society kind of looked at that mental health, especially at the time, was just suck it up and get over it. And so I didn't properly deal with it, even through my time and when I joined the military and I went through basic training. I struggled. I struggled bad with it when I was in basic training. I spent a long time dealing with the idea because I blamed myself. I thought to myself, if I would have been there, I could have done something. I could have made it work. I could have made it better. So for years, I thought, I have to be there, otherwise things are going to go bad. And so I struggled through basic training and AIT in the Army because of that, because of being away from my wife and my kids and worrying that something was going to happen. And kind of in a way, that and my time in Iraq kind of helped me realize that, okay, I can be away and things aren't going to, go terribly wrong because I'm away. It's something that I had to deal with, and then I wound up actually finally talking to somebody about it. After way, way too late. But it's never really too late when it comes to mental health kind of stuff. But it's when you lose somebody like that, when you lose somebody that is that big of a spot in your life. My mom was my rock, and she was the one that I leaned on, the one that I felt that I could talk to about most everything. We didn't always get along. I I was a teenager, she was a mother, and so there was that kind of normal friction there, but she was still the one that I realized that I knew I could depend on. And to this day, there's been other losses in my life. There's been friends that I've known, people that I served with, my wife's grandma, who I was kind of, I was closer to her than anybody else in my wife's family. And she passed away, and that was hard. That was harder on my wife because that was a big person in her life. And I've found over time that, like, now I look at loss in a much different way than I did back then. I've grown older. I've had some experience with life, and I've realized that loss, funerals, that kind of stuff, those are for the living. My grandmother passed away last year, and she I had thought at one point, her and I were pretty close, and I had always imagined that I was gonna have a really hard time coping with her death. But when the time actually came, found I found it almost a relief because the pain that she was in, the stage that she was in life, she was just miserable. And I kind of was able to deal with that a lot better than I thought I would. I didn't go to the funeral, which really annoyed a lot of people. There's people in my family that were just irate with the fact that I didn't go to the funeral. And it's the thing is, the funerals are for the living. And especially in those kind of situations, to me, now everybody's going to feel different about this, obviously, like I said before, but like for me, funerals are for the living. I don't feel the need to go to the funeral for most people. I don't want to I don't want to be in a situation in my life. I don't want to lose anybody else close. It's almost inevitable at times, but it's something where unless I feel that I could get something out of a funeral, I'll deal with it in my own way. I'll deal with the loss in my own time, in my own way of doing it, and I don't let it get to me the same way that I did a long time ago. If I knowing who I am today, if I had been that way when my mom passed away, I would have gone to her funeral because I would have needed that closure. But as it was, I went because it was just a blur. I didn't think about it at the time. It didn't really hit me because of how sudden everything was. And that's just part of growing up and part of learning how to deal with those kind of things. Nowadays, I can't say that I would be, I can't say how I would deal with any one person that I know passing away, but like, I, I look at, I look at loss a lot differently now. And it's not just death either, because I've been through a lot of loss when it comes to family as well. I grew up with, kind of I wasn't close with my cousins and my uncle and all them, but they were part of the family, and we had my great aunt was there and we had kind of an extended family. And over the past 20 years basically since mom died, that family has split up and I've lost that family. I don't feel like they are family anymore. We drifted apart. And it's even includes like my brothers. I've got two brothers that one doesn't want to talk to me anymore. The other I rarely hear from. I've got three sisters. One I've never met, one I haven't talked to in years, and another one that's kind of kicked me out of her life again for the second time. You know, it's it's something I've learned to deal with, and it's something that I've grown accustomed to and expecting that, most people I don't expect people to stick around anymore, whether it's death or some other reason. It's something that I've learned to deal with in my own way as far as loss is concerned. And you know, I can't think of a better way to really put it because like I said, we all go through our own way, our own thing, and everybody kind of. I sometimes have thought, how nice it would be to have that extended family and have those people and have those relationships, but I'm just not there, and I've learned to deal with that. And a lot of that's been through just the large amount of loss that I've had over my life. The last, if you're talking about loss outside of death and stuff, the last big loss I had was my job when I got laid off a few years ago. But because of everything I've been through before that, I learned how to turn that into a positive. And it's kind of what I've done with the loss now is I've started to kind of find ways to turn loss into a positive. And I think that's really a productive way to deal with it. If you can learn how to take what should be a negative, for a lot of people, loss is a negative, whether it's the loss of a job, loss of a loved one, loss of a relationship. If you can learn how to turn those things around and make them into positives, you can go a lot farther. And that's not to say, you obviously we're humans. We're going to get invested in relationships and things like that. And it's good to get invested and let yourself get invested in those things, but you also have to know how if something happens to be able to turn that into something you know, that isn't as bad as it seems on the outside. When I got laid off, I turned it into an opportunity for building my own business. And though it's been a long process, it's been a difficult process to say the least. Uh, it's a good thing overall for me. And the same way, when my grandmother passed away, and looked at it and I said, well, she was suffering, she was in a bad way, and it was better for her to be, to finally have her life come to an end. She was ready for it. She was ready for years. She went through all kinds of loss in her life. She didn't deal with it very well because, one, she didn't really go talk to anybody, and the people that she did talk to weren't great. She lost her daughter, her husband, her other daughter, her sister, just left and right. She was losing people. And then her physical health and everything. So I looked at that and I said, well, it sucks I'll never get to talk to her again, but it's better for her. And for me, it's just become that of turning the loss into something positive and finding a way, because realistically, loss is like opening a door, another opportunity. And it can feel really counterintuitive to think that way, especially when it's a death. But even in those circumstances, uh, you're still alive. It's so hard to deal with it and think about it in the moment, especially if it's somebody really close to you, but you're still here. And that person's gone, and you have to go through the emotions, you have to go through the steps of healing. You never fully heal from a loss. I've never fully healed from losing my mom, but I've learned to deal with it in constructive ways. And I've learned, and I've thought over the years too, that, if it weren't for that moment, my kids might not be here, because it was kind of, her dying was kind of a catalyst in a way to my wife and I getting back together, because we had been dating in high school. We had broken up right before graduation. And my mom dying was kind of a catalyst that a few months later we wound up getting back together and moving in together. And had mom not died, that might not have happened, and I might not have the kids that I have today. And I might not have the life and the experiences. And so you have to be able to look at those things, and even in the moment when it feels really, really shitty, when it's fresh is when it's the worst. And especially those first holidays after, I really think back honestly to, so somebody that my wife works with, right before Christmas last year, lost her husband. They were both young. And it was kind of it was close to home for both of us, because, we've both thought about, what would happen if something happened to one of us. And this woman went through losing her husband. She's got young children, and it was unexpected. And that's something that, in the short term, you can't just think about it. You can't find it. There's no positive. There's no looking at it and saying, well, this is okay. No, that's not the way it works. But in the long run, part of the healing process has to be finding the positive and the bad and the negative, and taking that loss and being able to turn it around and make something good of it. If something were to happen to me, I've had this conversation with my wife. I would want her to still be happy. I would want her to go. She said that we've both said that we wouldn't, want to find anybody else. But I've told her, I want you to be happy. I want you to get out there and do things, live your life, because that's what I want you to do. I would be happiest if you were happy, and regardless of the circumstances. I think it's important to have those conversations too, because a lot of people are afraid to talk about death. People are afraid to have the conversation about, what if something happens to me, at least in a serious tone. But you have to have those conversations. You have to be able to tell your loved ones, hey, I don't want you to be sad. I know you're going to cry. I know you're going to shed tears, but I don't want you to have my death be the catalyst that ruins your life and makes you go downhill. You know, my brothers, specifically, I look at them, and since my mom died, or our mother, we've all gone separate ways, and they have dealt with it in their own ways, but in much worse ways in at some instances, especially my youngest brother, who went out and had gotten into drugs and got into drinking and spiraled for a long time. He's the one I haven't talked to in almost a year now because he doesn't like the way that I think. He doesn't like my opinions on these type of topics. You know, he spiraled in a bad way. My middle brother, he went off on his own thing and had his own issues. You know, I had my problems, but I was lucky enough to have somebody by my side that helped me through it. You know, that's my wife and I have been together for almost 20 years now. We've been through thick and thin, through hell and high water together, and she was there with me, helping me through some of the hardest times in my life, even when she didn't realize what was causing it. You know, and that's something that I wish now that I had known then what I know now. I wish that I had had the worldview then that I have now, because you know, I would have handled it much better. I would have still cried. I would have still missed her, you know, and gone through the phases of grief and all that, but I would have dealt with it in a much more constructive way. You know, because I look back on it now and I'm like, okay, well, all of these other things, these positive spinoffs, yeah, there was negative things that happened, but those negative things were the result of people making bad decisions afterwards because they weren't thinking clearly. Because people make bad decisions when they're grieving. And so, you know, I wish that I knew then what I know now. And I think that's kind of the story of life in general. Is hindsight's always 20/20. And you always are able to look back at the past and say, gee, if I would have only known. But I feel like the least I can do is pass along what I know now in the form of this, even if nobody ever hears it. You know, chances are this is a podcast on Patreon, on YouTube. People are probably never going to hear this, honestly. The reason I'm focusing on building a business offline and doing what I'm doing in my personal life, like, because online stuff is just, nobody's going to hear this ever. But maybe, just maybe, somebody comes across this that is dealing with grief and loss, and maybe it helps them. You know, maybe you're listening to this right now, and this has been helpful to you, hearing somebody else's experience and what they've gone through. And, you know, just know that if you're going through that, that you're not alone, that you're not other people have gone through it and made it through, and you can too. And there'll be times it'll be tough, and there'll be times that you'll be feeling like the world is just on your shoulders, or the world is just coming to an end, but that's not the case. And in reality, just take it day by day and focus on the positives, focus on finding those things, those things that turn that negative, that bad feeling into something productive. So that's going to do it for this one. I really, I don't script these things out. I have a topic for different episodes. For each episode, I've got their own separate topic, and then I just sit down and kind of ramble on, and that's it's not great for retention and that kind of stuff. But you know what? I don't really care about retention anymore. I cared about it at one point. I used to care about whether or not I grew a YouTube channel and grew a following on YouTube and on the internet, and I just don't care anymore. You know, it's gonna be a topic I think I'm gonna talk about next, and because it's something that really, really gets to me. So, but that's for a future episode. If you like this, like and subscribe. If you're on Patreon, thank you for being a patron. I appreciate you. You help me out, and I just want you to know that I really do appreciate it. But everybody, I want you to have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.